All right, kids. Hey, it is January the 19th for our U.S. government class. And just as a reminder, we have a assignment on the Google Classroom, which is over the Mayflower Compact, City on a Hill, and Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. And my plan is we're going to do a lecture today, do a lecture Thursday. But next week on Thursday, I'm planning on having a test for you. More to follow next Tuesday. So do that. All right. So 3 of you so far have turned in your online assignment. So if you have not done it, it is? I thought it was due today.
I thought it said Friday.
Are you sure? Let me look. See, now I'm second guessing myself. Okay. I too will say January the 13th. Wait, what?
It says
This is due today. Wrong class. You're thinking of somebody else. Yeah, wrong class. Hey, all right. So we're going to start with the first one, chronological order, 1620. So this is written by William Bradford, but you see there's a lot of co-signees here, right? So if you remember, the Pilgrims came over and they were trying to settle around Jamestown, Virginia, because they wanted some of that sweet tobacco money, because cash crops raked in all the money, and everybody loved tobacco back then, because they just, life was pretty boring, I guess. All you had was Shakespeare and death. So,
and play, don't
and play,
play.
and alchemy, which didn't work. All right, so.
And religious persecution.
Well, that's part of these folks. Like Pilgrims were actually had a lot of religious beliefs that were in line with this guy here, King James. It's actually the same King James, the King James Bible. But this is that he didn't like the things they did dissent on, and even though they were religiously very close, he was pretty quick to even persecute his own fellow Protestants.
The thing is,
well, hold on, Michael. You didn't raise your hand. All right, so a little bit about this. So yeah, they're leaving. During this time in England, there had been a lot of back and forth as far as religious persecution. You had King Henry VIII had separated from the Catholic Church, and he formed his own Church of England. And then following him, you would have religious persecution under his daughter. Now, he religiously persecuted as well. He killed people for being Catholic and not part of his church. But then later on, his daughter, Queen Mary, would do the same thing, but she was Catholic and she would persecute Protestants. So this was back and forth. During Queen Elizabeth, there was some of this as well. And then King James, it's going to flip again, and he's going to do it. So the reason behind it, though, wasn't necessarily religious dissent. It's that if you had a different belief system than the king, you're just deemed a traitor. They don't really care, like as far as like fundamentals of belief and things like that. It had to do with disobedience to the king. And so you see here, the people who wrote this were very careful to make sure that they showed due respect to the king. Loyal subjects of our dread sovereign, Lord King James, by the grace of God. So, of course, these are religious people. They call themselves pilgrims. They're looking to make a place that's like a new Jerusalem, right? And we're going to see this as a theme for our next place. And essentially, the whole thing about this isn't about creating a constitution. They're not writing down any laws. They're basically saying here, in order to form a civil body politic, which was a big idea at the time. When we talk later on about Thomas Hobbes, we'll talk about the body politic a bit. And that's the idea that we're all part of the same organism. The king is the head, and the arms are the military. The body is like the intelligentsia, and of course the feet are the peasants. And they all have to work together to make sure it all works out. And they're just talking about, we agree we're going to live with each other. We're going to have laws and ordinances and officers. We're going to make sure we're safe. Part of it has to do with they didn't end up in the new world where they thought they would be. But they didn't give up. So they knew they'd have to live with one another. And this is just an agreement that we're going to be a civil people. We're going to be a civilization. And we're going to work it out. So,
Wait, does the word civilization come from civil?
yeah, from like, the Latin word cibus, like the city. All right. Next one, John Winthrop sitting on a hill. This one is a sermon. So here we have more of those pilgrim people, Puritans. And Puritans are essentially, it's where Baptists are going to come from. You could think about them as like hardcore Baptists, right? They come from Calvinism, and a lot of the belief system is going to emerge from Scotland. The style these folks come from, but also from the Netherlands. So John Winthrop is a preacher, and he's talking to his congregation as they board the boats to go to the New World. So we've already had pilgrims go to Plymouth. And they said, hey guys, or y'all should come on over. And they're like, okay. So 10 years later, 1630, we have his sitting on a hill. And you see this sermon, it brings up a lot of historical religious perspective. As we're talking about, is to follow the counsel of Micah, walk humbly with our God. So they're talking about working together in labor. Yeah.
I would actually have a question.
What's that?
Even though Jamestown and Roanoke was lost, but Jamestown was technically the first one.
Mhm.
Why do we celebrate Plymouth Rock as the first colony, and then later on we learn that it's actually Jamestown?
Well, I mean, Jamestown is the first by over decade. But I do know this. Plymouth was very small. But what made Plymouth different is that in Jamestown, essentially the guys went down there to pillage. The whole idea was to try to find another Aztec empire, like loot some gold, make them put it on the boats, and come home and be heroes. It didn't work out that way. And it's supposedly just like an adventure operation that turned into eventually a plantation operation.
Tobacco.
Yeah, but at Plymouth, you actually have whole families come, and they actually make a city that's functioning and where people are procreating and living the same lifestyle that normal human beings would be, instead of just a bunch of guys who eventually become a military barracks, half starved, and trying not to die from elements and Indian attacks. So I think that would be a big distinction. And so here we have, whereas there it was command, here we have people actually living together, I guess. So of course they call it New England, and he's asking for like wisdom. I think this is only part of the sermon. I think the original sermon was longer than that. So we must consider that we shall be a city on a hill. So they want to be a new Jerusalem. They want to be a new Israel. And the eyes of all the people are upon us. They really believed that they were going to stand out as something that was a beacon to the rest of the world. Because they're coming from Europe. And one of the reasons they want to get away from Europe is they see Europe and England as a place of decadence. During this time in England, yes, you had like the Puritans, right? These people who were very strict, religious, observant people. But most people in England at this time didn't go to church. There's like severe alcoholism and stuff like that, a lot of gambling. And so that really put the Puritans off. And later on during the American Revolution, it's going to put off the revolutionaries as well, because soldiers are going to come in from England and are like, wow, these guys don't go to church. They just kind of curse out our mothers and get drunk all day. So it's going to be a cultural difference, right? And so they're going to see Europeans and the English as just like scathing sinners. And they say like, well, if we can make like this perfect Christian society, maybe they'll change their minds. So once again, you have reference to the great lawgiver Moses, which America gets a lot of its legal inspiration from, of course, historically, because most of the people who made the Constitution were at least culturally Judeo-Christians. And so, yeah. All right, the next one. All right. So, and the last one, this is essentially America's first constitution. It wasn't a constitution for all of America, but it was the first written constitution for a colony. And we see it starts in 1639. And so once again, it starts with a beseechment to God. It says, for as much as it hath pleased Almighty God by the wise disposition of his divine providence, so to order and dispose of things, that we the inhabitants, residents of Windsor, Hartford, and Wethersfield. So, once again, these are, nothing was secular back then. And you're going to find that nothing is going to be secular at all in America until centuries later. Everything was the world and the spiritual world combined. Because people, of course, people do today, but people certainly normally during this time believe that their actions on earth had a connection to the spiritual world. Of course, like it says here, through providence. And so you see here, they're going to be 2-year assemblies or courts. So they're talking about having a representative government, a government that will see to the people. They're going to see elections of the magistrates. So this essentially has parliamentary system, just like in England, where people in boroughs or districts, you could call it, vote for somebody to make laws for them, to represent them. Just so they're bringing like England to America. That was a big part. These people thought of themselves as Englishmen. Orders and great secretary not nominate persons shall be chosen newly into the magistrate, which is not propounded some general. So they want to make sure their representatives have been vetted. It is ordered, sentence, and decree that no person shall govern above 1 or 2 years. So they have limits to how long a term is. Also, so you see there's rules here on how their people in their parliament must be. It has to meet. It has certain powers it's allowed to do. So we're seeing like limitations set because that's one of the things we talk about in America, right? Limited government. The government is limited by law, and the fundamental orders of Connecticut limit what the government can do. Who can be part of that government? Where their jurisdiction is, where they can make laws, where they can go to meet. So don't get too caught up in the technicalities of this. When you're writing on this, look at the generalities. It's the generalities where you can get the gist of it. If you can get the gist of things, you don't have to worry about getting so confused about the particulars of it. We don't have to parse it out like an attorney. I'm not asking you to do that. All right, I do want to spend a little bit of time starting out with this on the roots of America, American government. I'm asking the office to order y'all a set of books. For those who aren't in class, I'm just going to send a PDF copy for them to read. But like I told you, the book is going to be John Locke's Second Treaty of Government, and it has also a little chapter on his letter of toleration. It's very important. If you understand this, you understand what people were thinking when they made the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, because this is the prime philosopher for what it's behind. The material we go over on this will be added to the material we already went over for your test next week. So I'm hoping, there's not that too much to it. We're going to talk about some of the philosophers behind the idea of American government and add it to the principles of government we already discussed and have it on your test. So, all right, so roots of American government. Click.
Oh, I think I figured out why Leslie thought it was due Friday.
Uh-huh.
It says, due to benchmark testing, next week will not lecture again until next Friday.
It's because I copy and pasted another assignment. That's my fault. Okay, yeah, but look at the due date. All right, so roots of American government. So we have American democracy, which we are not a democracy. We are at least, we're a democratic republic, you could say. But, well, actually, the more technical term is a constitutional republic with some democratic leanings. Like sometimes we might vote on statutes, stuff like that locally. All right, so you see the roots are ancient Greece, which had direct democracy. But also though ancient Greeks had direct democracy, they would also have position like offices, right? Like where, like they would vote for their generals and such. All right, English influence. We have Magna Carta, Parliament, English Bill of Rights. Of course, there's much more to that too, like common law. We'll talk more about common law later. Colonial influence, the House of Burgesses, Mayflower Compact, and of course some other things we went over. Enlightenment thinkers, and this is only some of them: John Locke, Montesquieu, Voltaire, and Rousseau. Now, I don't know so much about Voltaire. Like,
We already read Voltaire. In,
what, Candide?
Yes.
Ah,
Yeah, we
Candide's
did.
kind of funny. It's bad, but it's funny. Yeah, but
Wait.
Voltaire wasn't a builder though. He was more of a critic. Like I don't think
Wasn't the Roman Republic also?
I still have my.
it absolutely was. It absolutely was. Like,
I still have it back
ah, neat. Yeah, I haven't read Candide in years. I mean, you could also say like Blackstone, so on and so forth.
Now,
You
give
can
your
have it
book.
printed.
Check the fuck, it's worth it. You might want it one day.
Here, take it.
No, I have one.
What'd you say?
Huh?
What'd you say?
About what? Oh, I mean, there's other philosophers as well, other great thinkers like Blackstone. He was an English judge. It's credited with our idea of the Second Amendment. Let me think. Gosh, there's others too. It'll come to me in a match. My Edmund Burke a little bit, but he's gonna come later. All right, so ancient Greece. Athens is considered the birthplace of democracy. Yeah. The word democracy comes from the Greek word demos, which means people, and kratos, which means power. So people power. Athens was the world's first direct democracy. And direct democracy is where people can directly vote for laws or directly vote for government actions. The founders studied ancient authors such as Plutarch and Thucydides, and they understood from these authors and Herodotus the dangers of direct democracy, about how Athenians would do things like vote for war one day because of a demagogue would convince them to do so. Somebody with celebrity status, right? It drums up the people, makes them do something irrational, like slay a whole town. And then the next day totally regret it and try to call back the warriors.
That's what exactly what happened. It was like they were like, "Hey, we don't like this town." And everybody's like, "Oh, we don't like this town either." And they sent all these warriors, and they're like, and then the next day they're like, "Oh God, we did something. We need to stop them." So they had this boat rowing to go slaughter an entire village and island and beach islands, and this boat rowing continuously throughout the night, trying to get to this one boat. Telling them, wait, we changed our minds.
Yeah, and that's one of the dangers they saw. Another danger they saw from direct democracy is historically that whenever the common people could all vote, sometimes they would figure out that they could vote to take all that the wealthy had. And if they start voting that where they can take the wealth of the wealthy, then essentially everybody's poor all of a sudden, and the city corrupts and falls apart.
You sound very similar to what happened during 2020 with all the riots.
Well, I mean,
Because people were talking a lot about how they wanted to replace any kind of republic system with democracy only and take everything from the wealthy. That was some speeches where I made.
I'm a little curious about those because there were so many hands in the pot and all that. I'm not sure who was in control of it. You know, it was very strange to me.
Yeah, I know that the local protests were organized by, one person that didn't have any sort of, position politically.
Yeah, and that's one thing that kind of bothers me. It'd be kind of different if it was all locals, like about local issues.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I've always kind of wondered whenever it's people from different areas coming in, and they got different agendas.
Well,
And all it was always
the local ones. I mean, like in Tyler, they were peaceful. They were organized by locals.
Oh yeah, my wife drove by those. You know, it was like just people.
the thing about some of those bigger riots, they're mostly drummed up and stirred up by anarchists.
Well, yeah, I've heard certain like theories about like that, like funding organization. I'm
Yeah,
like,
I've heard that some people, would go out to some of the bigger ones just to riot and loot. They didn't care at all about the movement. They just wanted to
Yeah.
steal stuff and
Crime of
make a
opportunity.
big fight. Yeah.
And also the people wanted to drum it up, like start, like what is the word where you like a plant? Like you plant someone into like a crowd to rile up everyone else.
An instigator.
Yeah, and it's, yeah, they would most, well, now it's actually technically a terrorist organization, Antifa. They actually had people in the recent riots, not just the Capitol riots, but all the riots during the Black Lives Matter riots. They would have instigators in the crowd trying to drum it up.
Michael, from what I've heard, Antifa it doesn't really have any name.
He didn't say Antifa.
That doesn't mean that there's not
Yeah, you did.
people
Oh,
that.
No, there are people who actually legitimately just.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
people who have no affiliation and they just get paid out by different people to start
Yeah,
stuff.
all that Antifa means, I think, is it's anti-fascist. That's all that it means.
They are fascists.
Well, they are fascists,
They are fascists.
Wow,
They
but they're just
It's
not
like you had a
organized.
Nazi,
All
anti-Nazi.
conspiracy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'd be funny if I got YouTube banned for a lot of that.
But
All right.
it's not, a terrorist organization.
But hey,
Yeah, well,
um,
they did.
I got
something
you.
that was-
Hey,
They
folks.
definitely commit violence in the name of a political idea.
Hey, we can talk about that later. We can talk about that later. Let's get some more of this because I want to touch on it later. All right. So ancient Rome. So as I mentioned earlier. So yeah. Once again, going back to the founders, of course, they would also study Pliny and Livy and other Roman authors, and they would see because the Romans really loved writing about how the stories about how their government worked, and also about morality, like how moral people in government made things work well. Just laws over immoral people worked out well. But when the people were corrupt or when the lawgivers were corrupt, there was problems. Romans always blamed their problems on their personal morality. And that's one thing that set the Hebrews apart from other ancient people in their area too. They believed if something bad happened, like there was a plague or they lost a war, they blamed themselves, right? They blamed sin. They didn't blame others. They didn't blame the gods or something like that. So you're going to find that the Romans are like this as well. They blame their own failings of morality. Like somebody was corrupt, somebody made a poor decision, they chose an incompetent person, or the people were greedy. Then they would blame that instead of blaming the gods all the time, though they were very superstitious people. Rome followed Greece's example and established their own form of democracy, kind of. The Roman Republic was made up of elected representatives who protected Rome and its residents. And of course, republic comes from the two Latin words res publica, public things, and that's what it was about. These elected Roman representatives, known as senators, wrote and debated laws in the Roman Senate, making Rome a democratic republic. And Rome didn't quite have a constitution, but they did have laws and they had traditions that they very strictly adhered to until, of course, things will change with the Roman Empire once you start having emperors take over. But a lot of the times, even during the Roman Empire, Roman authors would write about how great things were back when it was just a republic, and about just how like really the idealized time. And even in the Renaissance, they would always worship this idea of a republic. Hey folks, I think we're going to end it here actually because I want to give you the rest of class time to work on your assignment, which is due today. And so we're going to come back on Thursday. We're going to have more of this and all that good stuff. Why? I want to see what you can do today.